Welcome back, friends. This is the Happy Homestead channel. I'm Amanda. I'm glad you're here with me today. We are on our third episode of our cheese making series, and today we are going to make what I would call the mother lode of all soft cheeses, mozzarella. But we are making a 30-minute mozzarella, if it actually takes 30 minutes, we'll see. I have made this a handful of times. It is so easy, so simple, and I think this is a really fun recipe for you to get others involved in the kitchen in your family with you. All we're going to be using today is milk, citric acid, and rennet. It's just 3 ingredients. We will be adding some salt as well if you want to include that, some Redmond real salt. But to start out, this is what we need. Again, really simple. So let's walk through the recipe together. Now, this is a recipe called 30-minute mozzarella on page 92 of our home cheese making book. If you're following along in this series, I recommend you hit subscribe so you can keep up to date as we go through our soft cheeses and slowly graduate into our hard cheeses. So with this recipe, it is calling for 1 gallon of milk. That yields approximately a pound of mozzarella cheese. Think about what you're going to be using this for. Now, the mozzarella cheese will last in the refrigerator for a couple of days. And so you really want to think, what are you using this cheese for? When do you need it? And kind of figure out when you need to make it. I would not go make a huge batch of mozzarella and just leave it in your refrigerator for a week, because it may not have that really fresh consistency and that flavor that you're looking for. So I'm actually only using a half gallon of raw milk today because we are going to have strombolis for dinner tomorrow night, and I'm going to use this mozzarella for our strombolis. And so you'll notice that as I'm going through this, I'm halving the recipe. I do that a lot in some of these soft cheeses because I just don't need a pound of something, right? I really like to make sure that I'm only making what I need. So the recipe calls for 1 gallon of milk. It calls for a teaspoon of citric acid. Now, you don't necessarily want to use lemon juice in this moment. I would recommend purchasing the citric acid, and I get mine from Azure Standard. You are then going to be using a 1/4 teaspoon rennet and about a teaspoon of the Redmond real salt. So again, having it, half a gallon of raw milk, and a half teaspoon of my citric acid and an 1/8 teaspoon of my rennet, diluted in an 1/8 cup of cool non-chlorinated water. We're going to dilute our citric acid also. I feel like there's a lot of talking, a lot of information. I apologize. I promise it's simple. First thing we're going to do is dilute our citric acid into the water, because that is going to go in our pot first. Again, recipes calling for 1 teaspoon dissolved in 1 cup. So I am going to be doing a half teaspoon dissolved in half a cup of water. Cool, non-chlorinated water. Well water, spring water, filtered water, but not city tap water. Okay, while we're allowing the citric acid to dissolve, I already have an 1/8 of a cup of non-chlorinated water in my little bowl here for my rennet. So I'm just going to add an 1/8 of a teaspoon of rennet. Now I want to add, when you're having these recipes and when you're doing cheese, from the New England Cheesemaking Company, they have these little measuring spoons, and I have found them extremely useful. I didn't think I would, but I really did. And they're mini measurements. The largest measurement is 3/16, then it goes down to 1/8, and it goes all the way down to 1/64 of a teaspoon. And you need some of those smaller measurements when you're getting into some of the other cheeses with some of the more specific types of culture. So just a tidbit, if you need a smaller size of measuring spoons, New England Cheesemaking Company has them. So you probably have noticed that as I was going through the ingredient list here, there is no culture. There's no thermophilic or mesophilic starter culture when you're making mozzarella. And that's just the way it is. That's the traditional way to make it, is with the citric acid, the salt, the rennet, and really good quality milk. So I'm using raw milk. You don't have to use raw milk, but make sure you're not using ultra pasteurized milk, and it will say it on the label if it is ultra pasteurized. Pasteurized milk, perfectly fine. In that case, when we get over the stove, you would heat that up to 90 degrees. Because I'm using raw milk, I'm heating it to 88. And I don't just know this fact from thin air. It's very clearly stated in the recipe. So as long as you're reading through, you'll know if you're using raw milk or pasteurized, which temperature to go to. Okay, we're gonna start adding everything into the pot to start. So remember, I've got my dissolved citric acid. You're actually adding that into the pot first. I'm gonna go ahead and turn my burner onto about medium. I'm gonna add my ½ gallon of milk. Now I have strained most of the cream out of here, but I did not get it all. So it's probably about, I would say, a 2% milk that I'm using. So we are gonna stir this really well. And we're gonna heat this up to, like I said, 88 degrees because I'm using raw milk. I'm currently at 56. This is not gonna take long, so I'm not gonna walk away. Just make sure, you know, when you're making cheese, you think it's gonna take a long time to get to a certain temperature. It doesn't necessarily, so make sure you're keeping an eye on your temperature. And once we get to 88 degrees, we'll add in our rennet. Slowly climbing. So I'm gonna add in my rennet. Stir really well back and forth and up and down. Turning the heat off. I'm gonna move the pot off of the heat a bit. And we're gonna let this sit undisturbed for 5 minutes. Our 5 minutes is up. Now what we're looking for is a really good curd set. So I'm just gonna use my spoon to pull away. Yeah, I don't think we've got enough curd set. So I'm actually gonna let this sit for a little longer. Okay, so it's been about 4 more minutes. And guys, I'm glad that happened because I want you to be aware of what it looks like when the curds are ready. And it's almost as if you pull it away. Do you see how it's not really going back behind the spatula there? If you can see that. It's basically pulling away from the side of the pan. That is how you know your curds have coagulated with the rennet and they're ready. So what we're gonna do is cut this into 1-inch cubes. This is called cutting the curds. And when you cut the curds, it helps release more whey. Depending upon the type of cheese you're making and how dry you need your cheese to be, depends on how much whey you release. Okay, so we've got 1-inch cubes. We're gonna turn our temperature back on. We wanna get it to 105 degrees. We're currently at 82. I'm gonna go down to medium. I'm gonna start to carefully stir my curds. You see how it almost looks like Jell-O. So as we stir and as we heat it up to 105, we'll start seeing some whey released, right? So you'll see the clear definition, right, between, or delineation rather, between the actual curd and the whey, which is almost like you can start to see some here, like this very pale yellow liquid. That's the whey. We are at 105 degrees. I'm going to turn the burner off. I'm going to take this over to the counter. So I just put it on the counter here, and I'm just going to continue to stir this for about 2 to 5 minutes. Now, in the meantime, I'm gonna go get some hot water in my tea kettle on about a medium heat. I wanna have some hot water ready at around 180 degrees, not too much hotter than that. And that's what we're gonna use to help stretch our curds. All right, we are ready to scoop our curds out. So I have a bowl here with just a clean colander in top. I'm going to scoop all of my curds into the colander. And they should start to kind of mat together, which basically means they become really one big mass. Just because of the temperature they're at, they should start to mat together. I'm gonna save this way. You don't have to, you can choose not to. I will probably use this whey to help water my plants. I'll dilute it, kind of a 1-to-1 ratio with whey and water. Because we use citric acid, I would consider this a pretty acidic whey. So I don't necessarily want to use it in my sourdough. And again, if you're using it with plants, you just want to dilute it with water. Okay, I'm going to set this aside. And our curds should be one large mass. I'm actually also going to put that whey back in my pot. And I'm going to put my curds in my bowl. And you'll start to see more whey getting expressed out, which is good. So you may have to periodically drain, the whey out. Okay, now in order to get these to properly stretch, this is where that hot water really comes into play. I'm just gonna do one more drain here. I am going to pour in some of that 180-degree water. Now guys, this water is hot, so I have gloves. I got these gloves from the New England Cheesemaking Company. They're basically food-safe gloves, but they allow you to work through and stretch your mozzarella without burning your hands. So really what we're going to start doing is stretching. I'm going to start with 2 balls. And we're just kind of working the cheese. The other one's still sitting in the hot water. And if it starts to get cool, it will break rather than stretch. So you can just kind of put it back in your hot water. But you're looking to really have it start to stretch. You can see it's starting but breaking. So again, I just want to get it back in my water. This process is fun, I think. Now, when you look at the directions in the book, it can be rather intimidating the way they have it written out. I find this method works the best with the hot water just at my disposal to add. At this point, you need to think about what you're doing with your cheese, right? What are you making it for? If you're just going to be shredding it and putting it on pizza, then it may not matter what the shape is. See how it's stretching so much easier though, by the way? That's what you want when you're looking for a mozzarella. But if I were serving maybe like a caprese salad with some mozzarella balls and some tomatoes and basil and herbs, I would probably start to actually try to make some little mozzarella balls. So, you know, you could do the size you wanted to do. If you wanted to braid it, right? I've done that before where you can separate this into 3 pieces and then start to braid it. The trick is to do everything while it's still very hot. So these gloves make it all that much easier. And if it starts to break, right, put it back in the hot water. Okay, my mozzarella is stretching beautifully, just how I would want it. So what I'm gonna do is get this into one mass. We're gonna put it into some cooler water and then we're gonna salt it. All right, I've got some cool water here. I've got my curd mass. I'm just gonna flatten it out a bit, and I'm going to add a ½ teaspoon of Rennet real salt. And I'm just gonna kind of mix that around a bit. And let that sit for 5 minutes. That's it. It did take about 30 minutes to make our mozzarella. So I will empty out this cool water, and the recipe then says to put it in 15 minutes of ice water. You can absolutely do that. I'm just gonna put this right in the refrigerator, and it's getting used tomorrow, so you know how I am. It'll be fine. But that's it. And I would actually probably sprinkle a little more salt in as well before I were to serve it, especially if you're serving it in like a caprese style dish. But our mozzarella is done. How beautiful is that? How beautiful is that chunk of cheese? Granted, again, it's getting used for stromboli and will be shredded. Thanks for joining me today on our 30-minute mozzarella journey. I want to hear if you do this. I promise you it is so easy, and it really is delicious, and it's a fun thing to do with the kids in the kitchen as well. In the fridge this goes. Stay healthy, stay well. Bye-bye.